There's something about playgrounds at night that feels wrong, even when you can't quite explain why. During the day, they're filled with the sound of children laughing, parents calling out warnings, the rhythmic squeak of swings moving back and forth. But at night, when all those sounds disappear, what's left behind feels hollow, like the playground is waiting for something. I never believed in ghosts or spirits or any of that supernatural stuff, but what happened to me changed that forever. This happened when I was 8 years old, back in the fall of 2015. My name is Marcus, or at least it was. I'm not entirely sure what I am anymore. The park near my house was my favorite place in the world. It was small, tucked into a quiet suburban neighborhood about 2 blocks from where I lived. The playground itself was pretty standard. A swing set with 4 swings, a tall metal slide that got burning hot in summer, monkey bars that I loved climbing, and a sandbox that always seemed to have more leaves than sand in it. The whole area was surrounded by a chain-link fence, and there were a few streetlights that barely worked, casting these weird blue shadows when they flickered on after sunset. I remember that particular evening clearly, even though some of the details feel fuzzy now, like trying to remember a dream. It was a Saturday, and I had been playing video games at home all afternoon. My mom had been calling me down for dinner, but I kept saying 5 more minutes until she finally got frustrated and sent me outside to burn off energy before bed. I grabbed my jacket, a gray hoodie I practically lived in, and headed to the park, even though the sun was already setting. I told myself I'd just swing for a little while and then head back home. The park was empty when I got there, which wasn't unusual for that time of evening. Most kids my age were inside having dinner or getting ready for bed. The air had that cool, crisp feeling that comes right before fall really sets in. I climbed onto one of the swings and started pumping my legs, going higher and higher until the chains made that creaking sound they always made when you went too high. There was something so peaceful about it. Just me, the swing, and the sound of the chains. At first, everything felt completely normal. I could hear distant traffic from the main road a few blocks away, the occasional dog barking, the wind rustling through the trees that surrounded 3 sides of the playground. The streetlights had just started flickering on, and one of them was casting this strange blue glow across everything. I remember thinking it looked kind of cool, almost like being underwater. I kept swinging, lost in my own thoughts, when I suddenly realized I wasn't alone anymore. I glanced to my left, and there was another kid on the swing next to me. A boy, maybe my age or a little younger, wearing a dark jacket. He was swinging too, pumping his legs in perfect silence. I hadn't heard him approach, hadn't heard the chain links jingle when he sat down, hadn't heard anything. That should have been my first clue that something was very wrong. I opened my mouth to say hi, but before I could get the word out, I blinked, and he was gone. The swing next to me was empty, but it was still moving, the chains still swaying back and forth like someone had just jumped off mid-swing. I dragged my feet against the rubber surface beneath the swings, bringing myself to a stop. My heart was beating faster now, and I told myself I must have imagined it. Maybe it was the weird blue light playing tricks on my eyes. Maybe I was more tired than I thought. I called out, "Hello? Is someone here?" But my voice just echoed back to me, swallowed up by the fog that was starting to roll in from the woods. I sat there on the swing for another minute, trying to calm down, trying to convince myself it was nothing. But then I heard it, a sound in the distance. The merry-go-round on the other side of the playground, the old metal one that squeaked like crazy when you pushed it. It was turning. I could hear the rusty metal grinding against itself, that high-pitched squeal it always made, but when I looked over at it, it was completely still, not moving at all. The sound continued for a few more seconds, then stopped abruptly, leaving behind a silence that felt heavy and suffocating. That's when more of them started appearing. I saw a little girl climbing the ladder to the slide, her movements jerky and strange, like she was skipping frames in a movie. 2 boys playing in the sandbox, their faces completely hidden in shadow even though the streetlight was shining directly on them. A small figure hanging upside down from the monkey bars, arms bent at angles that didn't look right, didn't look human. None of them made any sound. No laughter, no talking, no footsteps, just silence and those weird, flickering movements. I wanted to run. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to get up and sprint home as fast as I could, but I couldn't move. It felt like the swing was holding me in place, like invisible hands were gripping my shoulders. I tried to remember how I had gotten here, tried to picture leaving my house and walking to the park, but the memories felt distant and blurry, like they belonged to someone else. I tried to remember what my mom's face looked like when she told me to go outside, but I couldn't see it clearly. Everything was starting to feel wrong, disconnected, like I was watching myself from somewhere far away. Then I looked down at my hands, the hands that were gripping the swing chains, and I saw straight through them. Through my palms, through my fingers, I could see the metal links clearly, could see the ground beneath me. I was transparent, translucent in that weird blue light. I opened my mouth to scream, but the sound that came out was muted and hollow, like it was coming from underwater or from very far away. That's when I heard the voice calling from beyond the fence, past the rolling fog that was getting thicker by the second. "Marcus! Marcus, sweetie! Time to come home!" It sounded almost like my mother, but something about it was wrong. The tone was too cheerful, too sing-song, like someone trying to imitate her voice but not quite getting it right. All the ghostly children on the playground, the girl on the slide, the boys in the sandbox, the figure on the monkey bars, they all stopped moving at exactly the same moment and turned to stare at me with eyes that reflected that blue light. And then the memories came flooding back all at once. Running across this same playground 3 days ago, climbing too high on the monkey bars, trying to impress my friends, my hands slipping, the sickening sensation of falling, my head hitting the metal edge of the equipment with a crack that echoed through my skull. The world tilting sideways. My mom's screams, her real screams, full of terror and grief. The red and blue lights of the ambulance. Then darkness. Then nothing. Then waking up here, on this swing, in this blue-lit nightmare that wasn't quite real and wasn't quite a dream. I'm still here. I don't know how long it's been. Time doesn't work the same way anymore. Sometimes I think it's been hours. Sometimes I think it's been years. The voice keeps calling from beyond the fence, trying to lure me toward it. But I know it's not my mother. The other ghost children don't talk to me. But I understand now that they've all been through this same realization, that they've all made their choices about whether to accept what happened or keep pretending. Eventually, I got up from the swing, or maybe I floated, I can't really tell anymore, and I walked over to the sandbox where the two shadowy boys were playing. They made room for me without saying anything. I knelt down in the sand, and my hands sank through it instead of moving it. In the distance, I can see another child entering the park, alive and warm and full of color in this washed-out blue world. They look confused, calling for their parents. I watch them with eyes that have seen too much, that know too much, and I wonder if I should try to warn them. Would they even hear me? Would the warning help, or would it just make the realization more terrifying when it comes? The swings creak behind me, moving back and forth with no one on them. The fog swirls, the blue light never changes, and I sit here in the sand, waiting with the others, trapped in this moment between life and death, between knowing and not knowing, forever playing in a park that exists somewhere outside of time. This is where I am now. This is what I've become. And I think, maybe, this is where I'll stay forever. Marcus pushed himself higher on the swing, the chains creaking rhythmically above him. The blue light made everything look strange and dreamlike, but he tried to ignore it. Out of the corner of his eye, he noticed movement to his left. Another boy had appeared on the swing beside him, maybe 7 or 8 years old, wearing a dark jacket with the hood down. The kid was pumping his legs hard, swinging in perfect silence, No laughter, no breathing, not even the sound of his sneakers scraping against the rubber ground when he pushed off. Marcus turned his head to get a better look, maybe say hello, but the moment he blinked, the swing was empty, completely empty. Yet the chains were still swaying wildly back and forth, moving with the exact momentum they would have if someone had just jumped off mid-swing. Marcus dragged his feet against the ground, bringing himself to a jerky stop. His heart hammered against his ribs. "Hello?" he called out, his voice cracking slightly. "Is someone there?" The words echoed back to him, distorted and hollow, before being swallowed completely by the fog that was creeping across the playground like something alive. The empty swing beside him gradually slowed, its chains settling into an eerie stillness. Marcus stared at it, his hands gripping his own chain so tightly his knuckles hurt. Marcus forced himself to take a deep breath, trying to calm the panic rising in his chest. It was just his imagination. Had to be. The weird blue light was playing tricks on his eyes, making him see things that weren't there. Maybe he was more tired than he thought. He tried to smile at his own jumpiness, but the expression felt wrong on his face, like his muscles didn't remember how. He let his swing slow naturally this time, dragging his feet more deliberately against the ground. The sound that came from the chains as they ground to a complete halt made him wince. It was too loud, way too loud, like metal scraping against metal in an empty warehouse. The noise echoed across the playground in a way that didn't make sense, bouncing off nothing and everything at once, lingering in the air far longer than it should have. Then, cutting through the unnatural silence, came another sound. The merry-go-round. That distinctive high-pitched squeal of rusty metal turning on its axis. The sound every kid recognized instantly. Marcus's head snapped toward it, his eyes searching through the fog. The merry-go-round sat about 30 feet away, near the edge of the playground. It was completely still, not moving even slightly. Yet the squeaking continued for 3 more full rotations before stopping abruptly, leaving behind a silence that felt thick enough to choke on. Marcus's breath came faster now, small clouds of vapor forming in the increasingly cold air. He stood up from the swing, his legs shaky, and that's when he started seeing them. More children. They were appearing throughout the playground like images slowly developing on old photograph paper, faint at first, then more solid, then flickering back to translucent. A girl was climbing the ladder to the slide, her movements stuttering and unnatural. She'd be on the 3rd rung, then suddenly the 5th, then back to the 4th, like frames of a movie playing out of order. Her pigtails swung with each jerky movement, but Marcus couldn't hear her hands or feet touching the metal rungs. She climbed in absolute silence, flickering like a faulty fluorescent light. Near the sandbox, 2 boys knelt in the sand, appearing to build something together. But their faces were wrong, completely obscured by shadow, despite the streetlight shining directly on them. The darkness covering their features was too deep, too absolute, like someone had cut holes in reality where their faces should have been. Then Marcus's gaze drifted to the monkey bars and his stomach lurched. A small figure hung upside down from the highest bar, motionless. But the arms gripping the bar bent backward at the elbows, joints flexing in directions that human arms simply couldn't go. The figure's head dangled limply, swaying slightly in a breeze that Marcus couldn't feel. None of them made a single sound. Marcus backed away from the swing set, his eyes darting between the impossible children scattered across the playground. His mind scrambled for an explanation, for some logical reason why all of this was happening. He tried to remember coming to the park, tried to trace his steps backward to something normal and real. He had been playing here earlier, hadn't he? Or was that yesterday? Last week? The memory felt slippery, like trying to hold on to water. He remembered swinging, laughing, his mom's voice calling from somewhere beyond the fence. "Marcus, time to come home." He could almost hear it, that familiar sound that meant dinner was ready or it was getting too late. But when he tried to picture her face, really picture it clearly, the image wouldn't come into focus. It was like looking at a photograph that had been left in water too long, the features bleeding and blurring into indistinct shapes. He knew she had brown hair, or was it blonde? She wore glasses, didn't she? Or maybe not. The harder he tried to remember, the more the details slipped away, replaced by a gray emptiness that made his chest feel hollow. Panic clawed its way up his throat. Why couldn't he remember his own mother's face? Why did everything feel so distant and wrong? His hands began to shake, and he looked down at them, trying to ground himself in something real and solid. Marcus lifted his hands from where they'd been trembling at his sides, raising them to eye level. The blue light from the street lamp shone directly through them, through his palms, through his fingers. He could see the metal links of the swing chains behind him as clearly as if his hands weren't there at all. The skin, if it could even be called skin anymore, was translucent, gossamer thin, like looking through colored glass. He turned his hands over frantically, watching the light pass through them from every angle. His veins weren't visible, no bones, no tendons, nothing solid. Just this faint outline of what hands should look like, barely more substantial than the fog swirling around the playground. The scream that ripped from his throat came from somewhere deep and primal, a sound of pure existential terror. But it came out wrong, muted and hollow, like he was screaming underwater or from the bottom of a deep well. The sound didn't carry the way a scream should. It just dissipated into the thick air, absorbed by the fog, leaving no echo at all. Marcus staggered backward, looking down at his entire body now. His gray hoodie, his jeans, his sneakers, all of it had the same translucent quality. He could see the rubber surface of the playground through his own legs. The blue light shone through him like he was made of nothing but mist and memory. He wasn't real. He wasn't solid. He wasn't alive. The voice came from somewhere beyond the chain link fence, drifting through the fog like smoke. "Marcus! Marcus, sweetie, time to come home!" It sounded like his mother. Almost. The words were right, the tone was familiar, but something about it made Marcus's skin crawl. It was too cheerful, too sing-song, like someone imitating his mother's voice from memory, but not quite getting the inflection right. The cadence was off, the pauses between words just slightly too long. It reminded Marcus of those toys that recorded your voice and played it back, distorted and tinny. "Dinner's ready, sweetheart. Come on home now." The moment the voice called out again, every ghostly child on the playground stopped moving. The girl on the slide ladder froze mid-climb. The boys in the sandbox went completely still, their shadowed faces tilted upward. The figure on the monkey bars ceased its gentle swaying. All of them, every single one, turned their heads in perfect synchronization to stare directly at Marcus. Their eyes caught the blue light and reflected it back like animals' eyes in headlights. Flat, inhuman, glowing. None of them blinked. None of them moved, except for that slow, deliberate turn of their heads. They just stared at him with those luminous eyes, waiting, watching, as the voice continued calling from beyond the fence, sweet and wrong and hungry. "Marcus, please come home. Mommy's waiting." The voice called again, and something inside Marcus cracked wide open. Memories flooded back like a dam breaking, rushing through him in a torrent of images and sensations he'd been blocking out, hiding from, denying with every fiber of his being, running across this playground. 3 days ago, no, it felt like 3 days. But time was meaningless now. He'd been with friends, showing off, laughing, the monkey bars. He'd climbed too high, higher than he should have, reaching for the top rung to prove he could do it. His hands slipping, the brief, weightless moment of knowing he was falling, then impact. The sickening crack of his head hitting the metal edge of the platform, the world tilting sideways, colors bleeding together, his vision dimming at the edges, voices shouting his name, but not the sing-song voice calling now. Real voices, panicked voices, his friends screaming for help. his mother's face appearing above him, her real face coming into sharp focus now, the absolute terror in her eyes. Her mouth open in a scream that seemed to go on forever, red and blue lights flashing, strangers in uniforms hovering over him, pressure on his neck. His mother's hand gripping his, squeezing so tight. Then darkness. Complete darkness. Then nothing. Then this. The park. The fog. The blue light. Forever. Marcus stumbled backward, away from the fence, away from that terrible voice that wore his mother's words like a mask. He understood now what it was. Not his mother. Never his mother. Something else entirely. Something that lurked at the edges of this place, feeding on the confusion and denial of children who didn't yet understand they were dead. It called to them with familiar voices, tried to lure them toward something worse than this fog-shrouded limbo. The ghostly children remained frozen, still staring at him with those hollow, light-reflecting eyes. But Marcus saw something different in their gazes now. Not menace, not threat. Recognition. They had all stood exactly where he was standing. They had all heard their own versions of that voice calling them home. They had all faced this same terrible moment of understanding, this same crushing realization that shattered the last fragments of denial. And they had all made their choices, to follow the voice into whatever hungry darkness waited beyond the fence, to run, though there was nowhere to run to accept, to deny, to rage, to surrender. Each of them had chosen, and each of them had ended up here anyway, trapped in this eternal blue twilight, playing their silent games in a park that existed nowhere and everywhere at once. Now it was Marcus's turn to choose. Marcus turned away from the voice, letting it fade into the fog behind him. His translucent feet moved across the playground in silence, carrying him toward the sandbox where the two boys with shadowed faces knelt. As he approached, they shifted apart without looking up, making space between them as if they'd been expecting him all along. He knelt down in the sand. When his hands touched the surface, they sank straight through it like passing through water, unable to displace or move a single grain. The boys continued their silent work beside him, building something he couldn't quite see, and Marcus mimicked their motions, his ghostly fingers tracing patterns in sand he could no longer touch. Behind him, the swings began to creak, moving back and forth with no one sitting on them, pushed by a wind he couldn't feel. Movement at the park entrance caught his attention. A child was walking through the fog, maybe 7 years old, looking around with wide, confused eyes. Alive. Warm. Full of color in this washed-out world. The child called out for their parents, voice echoing and unanswered. Marcus watched with eyes that had seen too much, that knew too much. He wondered if he should call out a warning, try to explain what was coming. But would they even hear him? Would knowing make the realization easier or infinitely worse? The other ghost children began to gather, watching and waiting. I never thought I'd be one of those people who had a paranormal experience. I was always the skeptical one, the kid who had a logical explanation for everything. But logic doesn't help you when you're trapped in a nightmare that refuses to follow any rules you understand. What happened to me at that park defies every rational explanation I tried to give it. Even now, I'm not sure if I'm telling you this story or if the story is telling itself through me. This took place in the spring of 2019, when I was 10 years old. I lived in a quiet neighborhood where everyone knew each other, where kids rode their bikes in the street until the street lights came on. The local park was right at the end of my street, maybe a 5-minute walk from my front door. It had all the standard equipment, swings, a sandbox, monkey bars, but the centerpiece was this massive metal slide, the kind they don't make anymore because they're considered too dangerous. It was tall, maybe 15 feet high, with a twisting, turning design that made you feel like you were falling when you went down it. That slide was my favorite thing in the world. On the day it happened, though I'm not even sure day is the right word anymore, I had been at my neighbor's house for a pool party. It was one of those hot spring afternoons where everyone jumps in the water to cool off. I remember splashing around, playing games, eating hot dogs and chips. But then things get fuzzy. I remember slipping on the wet concrete around the pool. I remember my head hitting something hard. I remember the world tilting, and then I remember sinking, watching the blue water close over my face, watching the sun get dimmer and dimmer above me until everything went dark. The next thing I remember, I was walking toward the park. I don't remember leaving the pool party. I don't remember getting dressed or saying goodbye or walking down my street. I just remember suddenly being at the park entrance, with fog so thick I could barely see 10 feet in front of me. The sun had set, or maybe it had never risen, I couldn't tell, and everything was bathed in this strange blue moonlight that made the whole playground look like it was underwater. Something felt wrong about it, deeply wrong, but I couldn't articulate what it was. I walked toward the slide, my favorite piece of equipment, drawn to it like a magnet. The fog was swirling around me, thick and cold, and the only sound was my footsteps on the rubber surface of the playground. No crickets, no distant cars, no wind in the trees, just silence and that oppressive blue light. As I walked past one of the slide's supporting poles, I noticed something scratched into the metal near the base. Crude letters that spelled out, "Help." The scratches looked fresh, the metal underneath still shiny. I kept walking, heading toward the ladder that led up to the top of the slide. But then, I passed the same pole again, with the same scratches, the same desperate message carved into it. That wasn't possible. I had been walking in a straight line. I touched the scratches, and a jolt of cold shot up my arm, so intense it made my teeth hurt. I pulled my hand back and turned around, trying to orient myself, trying to figure out how I had ended up back at the same spot. That's when I saw him. Standing exactly where I had been standing just moments before, staring up at the slide, was me. Another version of me, wearing the same dark jacket, the same jeans, the same confused expression I could feel on my own face. We existed at the same time, in the same space, both of us real and both of us impossible. My brain tried to reject what I was seeing, insisting it was just a trick of the fog, a reflection in water that wasn't there, anything but the truth. I decided to climb the slide ladder to get a better view, to prove to myself that I was just seeing things. As I climbed, the metal rungs felt cold and slippery under my hands. When I reached the top and sat down, my legs dangling over the edge, I looked down at the playground below and saw myself again, standing where I had been moments ago, looking up at me, looking down. Both versions of me existing simultaneously, staring at each other in mutual horror and confusion. I slid down to investigate, to confront my other self, to demand an explanation. But when I reached the bottom, he was gone. I circled the equipment, my heart pounding, my breathing quick and shallow, and then I saw the scratches again. "Help," carved into the pole. But I had walked away from that pole. I had gone in the opposite direction. None of this made any sense. Panic set in. I started running toward the park exit, toward the street, toward home and safety and my mom and normalcy. But within seconds, just a few seconds, I was back at the slide again. I ran in a different direction, toward the woods that surrounded the park. Same result. No matter which way I ran, no matter how fast or how far, I always ended up back at the base of that slide, staring at those same scratches. The loops started happening faster. Each time I tried to leave, the scene would reset, but with horrible variations. In one loop, I saw myself climbing the monkey bars, reaching for the highest rung, then falling and hitting the ground with a sickening crack. In another, I was choking on something near the water fountain, my face turning blue, my hands clawing at my throat. In yet another, I was face down in water, and suddenly, with crystal clarity, I remembered. The pool. My neighbor's pool. Slipping on the wet concrete, my head hitting the edge, sinking, the water filling my lungs, the burning sensation, the darkness. The loops came faster and faster, overlaying each other like transparencies stacked on top of one another. Suddenly, the playground was filled with dozens of me, translucent Ethans, ghost Ethans, all of them trapped in different moments of panic and confusion and death. Some were running, some were falling, some were drowning on dry land. All of them were reaching toward the real me, or was I the real one? I didn't know anymore, with desperate, pleading expressions. Then all the sound cut out. My ears popped like I had descended too deep underwater, like I had dropped in altitude too quickly. The world took on that heavy, pressing quality of submersion. The light bent wrong. I felt like I was floating, and I understood in one crystalline moment of absolute horror what had happened. I was still underwater. I had never left the pool. This park, this playground, these loops, they were my dying brain's interpretation of drowning, my consciousness trying to make sense of the sensations of death by placing them in a familiar, safe location. As my denial shattered like glass, the other ghost children in the park became fully visible. Not just me anymore, but others. A girl climbing the slide ladder over and over, never reaching the top. A boy falling from the monkey bars, hitting the ground, then rematerializing at the top to fall again. All of them stuck. All of them trapped in their own loops, their own memories, their own final moments stretched into eternity. I stopped running. What was the point? You can't run from yourself. You can't escape your own death. I sat down at the base of the slide. My breathing, did I even breathe anymore? Slowly calming. And the moment I accepted it, truly accepted what had happened, the loops stopped. All my ghost iterations faded away, condensing back into one single transparent form. The playground solidified into one unchanging moment, one eternal present bathed in that blue light. Sitting in that stillness, I finally saw what I hadn't been able to see before. Past the fence, past the fog, there was darkness. It might have been nothingness. It might have been something else. I don't know which would be worse. I stood up or floated up. The distinction doesn't matter anymore. And I walked toward it. Each step felt lighter, like I was becoming less solid, less real. Behind me, the playground filled with the sounds of children playing, eternal and unchanging, a recording stuck on repeat forever. I didn't look back as I stepped into the fog. I didn't want to see what I was leaving behind. I just kept walking, kept moving forward into that darkness, hoping that maybe, just maybe, there was something beyond it, something other than this endless loop, this eternal playground, this moment of death frozen in time. But I'll never know if I made it through, because right now, even as I tell you this story, I'm still sitting at the base of that slide. I'm still trapped in that loop. I'm still drowning in that pool, and I always will be. Ethan moved through the fog toward the slide, his sneakers making soft sounds against the rubber surface that seemed to vanish into the thick air almost immediately. The blue moonlight made everything look submerged, like he was walking along the bottom of a pool. His favorite slide loomed ahead, taller than he remembered, its metal surface gleaming with condensation. As he passed one of the supporting poles, something caught his eye. Scratch marks carved into the metal near the base, crude and desperate. Letters gouged deep enough to expose the shiny metal underneath the weathered paint. They spelled out a single word: help. Ethan stopped, staring at the message. A strange sense of déjà vu washed over him. He had just walked past this pole. He was certain of it. Less than a minute ago, he'd seen these exact same scratches in this exact same spot. But that was impossible. He'd been walking forward the entire time, hadn't doubled back, hadn't turned around. He reached out and touched the scratches, tracing the rough edges with his fingertip. The moment his skin made contact with the metal, a jolt of cold shot up his arm like an electric shock, so intense it made his teeth ache and his vision blur. He yanked his hand back, cradling it against his chest, watching frost form on his fingertips before slowly fading away. Ethan shook off the lingering cold and continued toward the slide, trying to ignore the growing unease in his stomach. He grabbed the metal ladder rungs and began climbing, the metal cold and slick beneath his palms. Each step upward felt heavier than it should, like he was climbing through water instead of air. When he reached the top platform, he sat down carefully, letting his legs dangle over the edge. From this height, he could see more of the playground through the shifting fog. The swing set, the monkey bars, the sandbox, all of it bathed in that strange blue light that made everything look like a faded photograph. Then his heart stopped. Standing directly below, right where he had been standing just moments ago before climbing the ladder, was himself. Another Ethan, wearing the same dark jacket, the same jeans, the same confused expression. The other Ethan was staring up at the slide, staring directly at him, and their eyes met across the impossible distance. Both versions of him existed simultaneously, in the same space, in the same moment. Ethan's mind recoiled violently from what he was seeing. It wasn't real, couldn't be real, just a trick of the fog, some weird reflection in the moisture-thick air. The lighting was playing with his eyes, creating shadows that looked like people. That had to be it. Because the alternative, that he was looking at himself, that two of him existed at once, was completely impossible. Ethan pushed himself forward and slid down, the cold metal burning against his palms as he tried to slow his descent. He hit the ground harder than expected, stumbling forward a few steps before catching his balance. He spun around immediately, searching for the other version of himself. Gone. Nothing there. Just empty playground and swirling fog. His breathing came faster now, shallow and quick. He had to get out of here, had to go home where things made sense. But first, he needed to understand what was happening. Ethan started walking, circling around the slide equipment, looking for some logical explanation. Maybe it had been his shadow, distorted by the weird angle of the streetlight. Maybe he stopped dead. There, on the supporting pole directly in front of him, were the same scratches. Help. The exact same desperate letters carved into metal. But he had walked away from that pole. He'd climbed the slide on the opposite side. He'd moved in a completely straight line. Panic squeezed his chest like a vice. His heart hammered against his ribs. This wasn't right. None of this was right. Ethan broke into a run, sprinting toward the park exit, toward the street, toward home and safety and his mom and normal reality. His feet pounded against the rubber surface, fog rushing past his face. Within seconds, just seconds, he was standing at the base of the slide again, staring at those same scratched letters. Ethan ran again, this time in a different direction, toward the woods that bordered the park. Same result. 3 seconds of running, then suddenly he was back at the slide, chest heaving, terror clawing up his throat. He tried the street exit, back at the slide. He tried cutting through the sandbox, back at the slide. Each time he ran, the scene would reset, but with horrible variations he couldn't ignore. In one loop, he saw himself climbing the monkey bars, reaching for the top rung. His other self's hands slipped, and he watched himself fall in slow motion, the body hitting the ground with a crack that echoed across the playground. The next loop, he was standing near the water fountain, hands clutching his throat, face turning purple as he choked on something invisible. The next loop, he was face down in water, bright, chlorinated water, not the fog, pool water. And suddenly, like a dam breaking, Ethan remembered. The party, his neighbor's pool, everyone laughing and splashing, the wet concrete around the edge, slick and dangerous. Running toward the diving board, his foot slipping, the world tilting, his head cracking against the pool's edge with a sound like a branch snapping. the water rushing up to meet him, sinking, the blue water closing over his face, his lungs burning, the sunlight above getting dimmer and dimmer. The darkness, the nothing. The loops accelerated, coming faster and faster, no longer waiting for Ethan to try escaping before resetting. They began overlaying each other like transparencies, stacked on top of one another, each iteration of himself existing simultaneously in the same space. An Ethan running toward the exit, an Ethan climbing the slide, an Ethan falling from the monkey bars, an Ethan drowning on dry land, hands clawing at his throat, an Ethan curled in the fetal position near the swings, an Ethan screaming silently, an Ethan walking in circles, an Ethan standing perfectly still, face blank with shock. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all translucent, all ghostly, all trapped in different moments of panic and confusion and death. The playground was crowded with versions of himself, each one caught in their own personal nightmare, their own fragment of understanding. The real Ethan, or was he the real one? Maybe he was just another iteration, another ghost among ghosts, stood in the center of it all, spinning slowly to take in the impossible sight. They were all reaching toward him with desperate expressions, their mouths open in silent screams, their eyes pleading for help he couldn't give. Some were solid, some were barely visible. Some moved in jerky stop motion, others in slow motion. All of them were him. All of them were dying, over and over, trapped in an eternal moment of realization. Then, without warning, all sound cut out completely. Not gradually, just gone, as if someone had flipped a switch. Ethan's ears popped violently, pressure building inside his head like he'd descended too deep underwater, like he'd dropped in altitude too fast. He opened his mouth to gasp, but couldn't hear his own breath. The world shifted. Everything took on that exact quality of submersion he'd been trying to ignore. That heavy, pressing silence that wasn't really silence but the absence of air-carried sound. The way the blue light bent and refracted wrong, distorting distances and angles. The sensation of floating, of weightlessness, like gravity had released its hold on him. His lungs suddenly burned. Not gradually, all at once, like they'd been burning this whole time and he'd just now noticed. The fog wasn't fog. It was water. Murky pool water, thick with chlorine, filling his nose and throat. Understanding hit him like a physical blow. He'd never left the pool. He was still underwater, still sinking, still drowning. This park, this playground, these loops, all of it was his dying brain's interpretation of suffocation, his consciousness trying desperately to make sense of death by placing it in a familiar, safe location. The blue light wasn't moonlight. It was sunlight filtering down through water, getting dimmer as he sank deeper and deeper into darkness. As Ethan's denial shattered completely, as he stopped fighting the truth and simply accepted it, the other ghost children in the park snapped into sharp focus. They'd been there all along, he realized, but he'd been too trapped in his own loop to see them clearly. A girl in a pink dress climbed the slide ladder over and over, reaching the top only to flicker back to the bottom rung and start again. She never made it to the platform, never got to slide down, just climbed eternally, her small hands gripping rungs that might not even be there anymore in the real world. A boy fell from the monkey bars, his body crumpling against the ground with a sickening impact that Ethan couldn't hear but could feel in his bones. The moment the boy hit the ground, he rematerialized at the top of the bars and fell again. And again. And again. An endless loop of the moment that killed him. Others wandered in circles or sat frozen in single positions, or flickered between multiple locations like bad television reception. Each one trapped in their own memory, their own death, their own fragment of time that had somehow become eternal. They were all stuck. All of them reliving their deaths or the confused moments after, unable to move forward, unable to move back, caught in an in-between that had no exit. Ethan stopped running. What was the point? You couldn't outrun yourself. You couldn't escape your own death. He walked slowly back to the slide, or maybe the slide came to him, space didn't work right here, and sat down at its base, leaning against the cold metal support pole where help was carved. His breathing. Did he even breathe anymore? Could ghosts breathe? Slowly calmed. The frantic pounding of his heart quieted. Or maybe he just stopped noticing it. The panic that had been driving him, forcing him to run and fight and deny, simply drained away, leaving behind a hollow calm. The moment he truly accepted what had happened, the moment he stopped fighting against the impossible truth, the time loops ceased. All around him, the dozens of translucent Ethans began to fade like morning mist. The running Ethan dissolved. The climbing Ethan disappeared. The drowning Ethan, the falling Ethan, the screaming Ethan, all of them condensed, collapsing inward, merging back into one single form. Him. Just him. One transparent boy sitting at the base of a slide. The playground solidified into a single unchanging moment. No more resets. No more loops. Just this. Eternal blue light filtering through fog that was really water, illuminating a park that existed nowhere except in the space between life and death. Sitting in that newfound stillness, Ethan could finally see clearly. Past the chain-link fence, past the swirling fog that was really water, there was something he hadn't noticed before. A darkness. Deep and absolute. It stretched beyond the boundaries of the park into something that might be nothingness, or might be something else entirely. He couldn't tell which would be better. The other ghost children continued their eternal routines around him, climbing, falling, wandering, waiting. But Ethan felt different now. Lighter. Like accepting the truth had untethered him from whatever anchored the others to their loops. He stood up slowly, his transparent form rising effortlessly. Each step toward the fence felt easier than the last, like he was shedding weight with every movement, becoming less solid, less attached to this place. Behind him, the playground suddenly filled with sound. Children's laughter, the squeak of swings, the metallic ring of feet on ladder rungs. Not real sounds, just echoes of what playgrounds should sound like. Eternal and unchanging, a recording stuck on repeat forever. Ethan reached the fence and passed through it like it wasn't there. The darkness beckoned ahead, vast and unknowable. He didn't look back at the slide, at the spot where he'd sat, at the playground that had trapped him. He simply walked forward into the fog and disappeared, leaving behind only an empty space at the slide's base and the question of whether he'd found peace or something else entirely. There are some things that happen to children that adults can never fully protect them from, no matter how careful they are. We're told not to talk to strangers, not to get into cars with people we don't know, to always tell someone where we're going. But sometimes, none of that matters. Sometimes, the worst happens anyway. And sometimes, even after it happens, you don't realize it happened at all. Not until it's far too late. What I'm about to tell you happened to me when I was 9 years old, in the fall of 2016. Or at least, that's when I think it happened. Time is strange now. It doesn't move the way it used to. My name is Liam. I had blonde hair and I loved playing at the park near my house more than anywhere else in the world. That park was my happy place, the place where I felt safest, where I could just be a kid without any worries or fears. The last clear memory I have from before everything changed, was walking home from school on a Tuesday afternoon. I remember it was a beautiful day, sunny and warm, with leaves just starting to change colors. I took a shortcut through the woods, a path I had taken hundreds of times before. It was faster than walking along the main road, and I always felt adventurous when I went that way, like I was exploring even though I knew every tree and rock along the path. I remember seeing a car slow down on the road nearby, pulling to the side. I remember a man getting out and calling to me, asking if I needed help with something. I remember thinking that was strange. Why would I need help? I was just walking home. And then things get fuzzy and confused. There are fragments of memories, pieces that don't quite fit together. A basement, pain, darkness, confusion, and then the park. When I became aware again, and I'm not sure waking up is the right way to describe it, I was at the playground. But something was immediately, fundamentally wrong. I couldn't move my legs. I looked down and realized I was buried in the sandbox, buried up to my chest. The sand was cold and damp, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't pull my legs free. My clothes were dirty, covered in playground sand and dirt, and something else I didn't want to think about. My blonde hair was matted to my head, and I could feel sand crusted on my scalp. I tried to call for help. I opened my mouth and shaped the words, "Help me! Someone help!" I could feel my vocal cords vibrating, could feel the air passing through my throat. But no sound came out, not even a whisper. It was like the world had muted me, like someone had pressed a button and removed my voice from reality. I waved my arms, trying to get anyone's attention, but no one came. In the distance, I could hear children laughing and playing, but they sounded far away, muffled, like I was hearing them through water or thick glass. Then I saw him. Through the fog that was rolling across the playground, I saw a boy who looked exactly like me. Same blonde hair, same clothes, or at least cleaner versions of my clothes. He was running and playing on the equipment, climbing the ladder to the slide, going down and laughing silently, running to the swings. He was playing with other children, other translucent, ghostly children who flickered in and out of visibility. I watched myself play while I remained trapped, buried, unable to move or speak or do anything but watch. I tried digging myself out, clawing at the sand around my waist with desperate fingers. My hands sank in easily, too easily, but nothing moved. The sand felt solid and liquid at the same time, like trying to scoop water. Each handful I removed would reappear instantly, filling back in as if I had never touched it. I was trapped completely, frozen in place while my duplicate played freely just a few dozen feet away. If I concentrated hard enough, my vision would split. I could see from both perspectives at once. Through the buried me's eyes, I watched the playground from this fixed, unchanging position in the sandbox. Through the playing me's eyes, I could see the fog-shrouded park, the other ghost children, and disturbingly, a small mound of sand with just the top of a blonde head barely visible, barely noticeable unless you were specifically looking for it. Most people wouldn't even see it. They'd walk right past. I tried desperately to remember what had happened, how I had ended up like this. But the memories were fractured, like a puzzle with pieces missing. I remembered walking home from school. I remembered the car. I remembered the man. Then pain. Then nothing. Then the park. I couldn't remember anything in between, and part of me didn't want to remember. My mind was protecting me from something, shielding me from a truth that was too horrible to confront. Without any warning, my consciousness suddenly snapped fully into the playing version of myself. I was running across the playground, feeling light and free and happy, like I was flying. I ran toward the swings and then stopped, glancing back toward the sandbox. And I saw him. Saw myself, buried there with arms reaching up, mouth open in a silent scream, eyes wide with terror and confusion. Horror stopped me mid-run. Other ghost children brushed past me, completely unconcerned, like they had seen this 1,000 times before. And then the memories came flooding back, unrestrained and brutal. The car, the man, being taken, being brought to a basement, the things that happened there, the pain, the ending, the horrible, final ending, then being wrapped up and carried through the woods at night, being buried here, in this sandbox, in this playground I loved so much, hidden beneath the surface where children played every day, completely unaware of what was beneath their feet. But my spirit couldn't accept it. My consciousness had split itself in two. Part of me trapped where my body was buried, and part of me free to play in the park I loved, pretending everything was okay, pretending I was still alive. I had been here for 2 weeks, fractured and unaware, living in both states simultaneously, neither fully dead nor able to move on. I approached my buried self slowly, the playing me walking through the fog toward the sandbox. I knelt down in the sand beside the mound, beside my own desperate reaching hand. When I touched it, both versions of me felt the contact, a cold electric jolt that ran through whatever I was now. Slowly, fighting against every instinct to keep running and playing and pretending, I pulled myself together. The buried form began rising from the sand as the playing form started fading. Consciousness merging, memories integrating, truth and denial collapsing into one single transparent boy standing on the playground. I became whole, or as whole as a ghost can be. I stood there in the blue light, fully aware now of what I was, of what had happened, of the horrible truth I had been running from. The other ghost children watched me with knowing eyes. They had all been through this same process, this same terrible journey from confusion to understanding. That's when I noticed movement at the park entrance. A new child stepping into the fog. This one was different. Alive, warm, full of color in this washed-out blue world. They looked confused, calling out for their parents, spinning around as the fog closed in. I recognized that feeling immediately. The disorientation. The sense that something was wrong but not knowing what. The slow dawning of horror that was about to come. I have a choice now. I could walk over there and try to warn them. I could tell them what's coming, try to prepare them for the moment when they'll realize they're not alive anymore. But would they even hear me? Would they understand? Or would the warning just make it worse, make the realization more terrifying when it finally comes? The other ghost children are gathering now, watching me, watching the new arrival. The park seems to hold its breath, waiting for my decision. The swings creak with no wind to push them. The fog swirls in patterns that don't follow any natural law. The blue light never changes, never wavers, eternal and cold. I start walking toward the new child, my transparent form drifting across the playground. I don't know yet what I'm going to say or do. I don't know if I'm going to be kind or cruel, helpful or silent. All I know is that this is what the park does. It collects us. It keeps us here in this in-between space, trapped in the moment between life and death, between knowing and not knowing, forever playing games that have no winners, only participants. And I think maybe this is where I'll stay forever. This is what I've become. A warning that no one will hear. A ghost that no child will see until it's too late. Another lost soul in a playground that exists outside of time, waiting for morning to come even though we all know deep down that morning will never come again. Liam stared down at the sand surrounding his chest, confusion and growing panic warring in his mind. He couldn't remember sitting down here, couldn't remember how his lower body had become buried. The sand felt wrong, too cold, too damp, clinging to him in a way that made his skin crawl. He opened his mouth to call for help. "Hello! Someone help me!" But nothing came out. Not a sound. Not even a whisper or a breath. Liam's hand flew to his throat, pressing against it as he tried again. "Help! Please!" He could feel his vocal cords vibrating beneath his fingers, could feel the air pushing up from his lungs and through his throat, could feel his tongue and lips forming the words. Everything was working exactly as it should. But the sound simply vanished the moment it left his mouth, absorbed by the fog like water into a sponge. He waved his arms frantically, hoping to catch someone's attention. In the distance, he could hear children laughing and playing, their voices muffled and far away, like he was hearing them through thick glass or from underwater. But none of them looked his way. None of them seemed to see him at all. This boy buried chest deep in their sandbox, arms flailing desperately in the blue-tinged fog. Through the shifting fog, Liam caught movement near the slide. A boy was climbing the ladder, and something about him made Liam's breath catch. Same blonde hair, same blue t-shirt and jeans, same sneakers with the frayed laces he'd been meaning to replace. It was him. Another version of himself, running and playing on the equipment like nothing was wrong. The other Liam reached the top of the slide and went down, his mouth open in what should have been a laugh, but no sound reached the buried Liam's ears. The playing boy ran to the swings next, pumping his legs to gain height, and other children, translucent, ghostly children, played alongside him. A girl on the adjacent swing. Two boys chasing each other near the monkey bars, all of them flickering slightly, like images projected onto the fog. Liam watched himself play while he remained trapped, unable to move, unable to make a sound. The playing version ran from equipment to equipment with boundless energy, completely unaware of or unconcerned with the fact that another version of himself was buried in the sandbox, arms waving desperately for help that would never come. The contrast was surreal and horrifying. One Liam playing freely, one Liam trapped and sinking, both of them existing in the same impossible moment. Liam tore his gaze away from his playing duplicate and focused on the immediate problem: getting out of this sand. He plunged his hands down into the cold, damp grains surrounding his waist, fingers spread wide, and began digging frantically. His hands sank in easily, too easily. The sand offered no resistance, parting around his fingers like water, but nothing actually moved. He scooped out a handful and lifted it, watching the grains slip through his fingers. But when he looked back down at the hole he'd created, it had already filled back in, smooth and undisturbed, as if he'd never touched it. Liam dug faster, more desperately, clawing at the sand with both hands. It felt solid and liquid simultaneously, an impossible contradiction that made his mind rebel. Like trying to dig through water, each motion meaningless, each handful removed instantly replaced. The sand had weight and substance when he touched it, but it wouldn't displace, wouldn't move aside to free him. He could feel it against his legs, cold and pressing, but when he tried to push it away, his hands passed through the same space over and over, accomplishing nothing. Across the playground, his duplicate ran to the monkey bars, laughing soundlessly, free and unencumbered while Liam remained trapped in this impossible prison of sand that wouldn't move. Exhausted from his futile digging, Liam stopped and stared at his playing duplicate. He focused on the other version of himself, really concentrated, trying to understand how this was possible. As he watched the boy run toward the swings, something strange happened. His vision flickered, doubled, like looking through two cameras at once. Suddenly, he could see from both perspectives simultaneously. Through the buried Liam's eyes, he watched the playground from this fixed, unchanging position in the sandbox. The fog swirling, the blue light casting everything in that underwater glow, the ghostly children moving in their jerky, flickering way. But through the playing Liam's eyes, he saw something completely different. He was running, feeling light and free, the wind against his face. Or was that just memory? He could see the fog-shrouded park from a mobile perspective, darting between equipment, seeing the other ghost children up close. And disturbingly, when the playing Liam glanced toward the sandbox, he saw it. A small mound of sand. Just a slight rise in the surface. And there, barely visible, barely noticeable unless you were specifically looking for it, the top of a blonde head, hair matted with sand and dirt. A small hand reaching up, fingers spread. Him, his body, easily missed, easily overlooked. Already halfway buried and sinking deeper, the dual vision made Liam dizzy, disoriented. He let it collapse back into single perspective, the buried one, the trapped one, and tried to think. How had he gotten here? What was the last thing he remembered before waking up in this sandbox? Walking home from school. That memory came easily, clear and bright. It had been a Tuesday afternoon, sunny and warm, leaves crunching under his feet. He'd been thinking about the math homework in his backpack, wondering if he'd have time to play video games before dinner. He'd taken the shortcut through the woods, the familiar path he'd walked hundreds of times, the one that cut 10 minutes off his walk home. Then, a car. He remembered a car slowing down on the nearby road, pulling to the side, a man getting out, calling to him. Asking something, asking if he needed help. That didn't make sense. Why would he need help? Then nothing. A blank space where memory should be. Then fragments. A basement. Pain. Terrible pain. Darkness. Confusion. Fear so intense it felt like drowning. Then the park. Waking up here, already buried, already split into two versions of himself. The memories were fractured, incomplete, like his mind was protecting him from something, shielding him from a truth too horrible to face all at once. Without warning, Liam's consciousness snapped fully into the playing version of himself. No transition, no gradual shift. Just suddenly he was running across the playground, his legs pumping, his lungs filling with air that might not be real. He felt light and free, unburdened, like he could run forever without getting tired. The sensation was intoxicating after being trapped and immobile. He ran toward the monkey bars, laughing, or trying to laugh, the joy of movement overwhelming everything else. Then he glanced back toward the sandbox. His body froze mid-stride. Horror crashed over him like a physical wave. There, barely visible above the sand line, was himself, the buried version. Arms reaching up desperately, fingers clawing at air, mouth open in a silent scream, eyes wide with terror and confusion. The blonde hair matted and dirty, the small mound of sand that held him prisoner, that was slowly swallowing him. Liam stood paralyzed, staring at his own trapped form, unable to process what he was seeing. The playing him looking at the buried him. Both real, both him, both existing in the same impossible moment. Other ghost children brushed past, their translucent forms passing through his shoulder, completely unconcerned. They'd seen this before. They'd all been through their own versions of this horror. The moment Liam saw both versions of himself, the playing and the buried, the protective walls his mind had built came crashing down. Memories flooded in completely, unrestrained and brutal. The car, the man getting out, smiling, asking if Liam had seen a lost puppy. The trust of a 9-year-old who'd been taught to help people. Following the man to look, the hand clamping over his mouth, being dragged into the vehicle. The basement that followed, dark, cold, terrifying. The pain. Days of it. Or was it hours? Time had no meaning there. Then, the ending. The horrible final ending that came as almost a relief after everything else. Then being wrapped in something. Plastic? A tarp? Being carried through darkness. The sound of a shovel breaking earth. Being lowered into a hole. Not a proper grave. Somewhere hidden. Somewhere children played. Where no one would think to look. Here. This sandbox. In the dead of night while the park sat empty. But his spirit couldn't accept it. Traumatized and confused, his consciousness had fractured itself as a protection. Part of him trapped where his body lay buried, unable to move or speak. Part of him freed to play in the park he'd loved so much, pretending everything was okay, pretending he was still alive. 2 weeks. He'd been here for 2 weeks, split and unaware. neither fully dead nor able to move on. The playing Liam moved slowly toward the sandbox, each step feeling heavier than the last. The other ghost children parted around him, creating a path, as if they knew what he needed to do, as if they'd all done this themselves. He knelt down in the sand beside the mound, beside his own buried form. Up close, he could see the terror in those eyes, the desperate plea for help in that silent scream. His own face, distorted by fear and confusion and the horrible realization of death. Liam reached down and touched the exposed hand. Both versions of him felt the contact simultaneously, a jolt of cold electricity that ran through whatever he was now. The buried Liam's fingers wrapped around the playing Liam's hand, gripping tight, and suddenly the dual perspectives merged into something more complete. Slowly, fighting against the horror and grief threatening to overwhelm him, Liam pulled himself together. Not physically, he couldn't pull his body from the sand, but consciously, spiritually, he drew the fractured pieces of himself into one whole. The buried form began rising from the sand, not through force, but through acceptance. As it rose, the playing form started to fade, becoming more translucent, less solid. They merged in the middle, consciousness collapsing into a single point. Liam became whole, a single transparent boy standing on the playground, no longer split, no longer denying, just a ghost, complete and aware. Liam stood in the center of the playground, whole and aware and eternally trapped. The other ghost children had resumed their routines, the girl climbing the slide ladder, the boy falling from the monkey bars, others wandering in their endless patterns. He wondered how long before he'd be doing the same, stuck in his own loop, reliving some fragment of his death forever. Then he noticed movement at the park entrance. A child stepped through the fog, maybe 6 or 7 years old. This one was different from all the ghosts around him, alive, warm, radiating color in this washed-out blue world. Reds and yellows and greens that seemed impossibly bright against the monochrome playground. The child looked around, confused, spinning in circles. "Mom? Dad? Where are you?" The voice carried clearly through the fog, real and solid in a way the ghost children's weren't. Liam recognized that feeling immediately, the disorientation, the sense that something was fundamentally wrong but not knowing what. The slow confusion that would eventually become horror. He had a choice now. He could walk over there and try to warn them, tell them what was coming, try to prepare them for the moment when they'd realize they weren't going home. Or he could welcome them gently to this in-between place, try to make the transition less terrifying. Or he could say nothing and let them discover the truth the way he had, slowly, painfully, through denial and loops and terrible understanding. The other ghost children stopped their routines and gathered, forming a loose circle around the edges of the playground. All of them watching Liam. All of them watching the new arrival, waiting to see what the newest ghost would choose to do with the newest victim. The park seemed to hold its breath, the fog swirling but making no sound. The swings creaked slowly, chains grinding against metal with no one sitting on them. The blue light filtered through the mist, never changing, never wavering, eternal and cold. Liam took a step toward the child, then stopped. His translucent form flickered slightly in the strange light. Would they even be able to see him? Would they hear his warning? Or would the words disappear into fog the way his screams had vanished into silence? The child called out again, voice breaking with fear. "Please, someone help me!" Liam remembered saying those exact words. He remembered the feeling of being unheard, of being invisible, of being trapped in a nightmare he couldn't wake up from. He opened his mouth, not knowing yet what he would say, not knowing if kindness or silence would be crueler. The park waited. The ghosts waited. The blue light never changed. And in that moment of terrible choice, Liam understood that this was his eternity now, watching new children arrive, knowing what awaited them, and having to decide again and again whether mercy meant warning them or letting them hold on to hope for just a little while longer.